Kia ora koutou, councillors. Welcome back from lunch. Kia ora. Welcome back. And welcome Olivia and Terry. Great to have you here to talk about the latest RMA updates and reform from government. And I note that we're looking at the freshwater related stuff today, so really looking forward to hearing about this and hearing from councillors in terms of some of the opportunities and options going forward. So thank you. I'll hand over to you guys. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. So I might just cover off a couple of items before we jump into the session. First is just how we want to run the session today. So I think we've got an hour set aside, but I've talked to the planning team who's coming up after this, and we can use a little bit of that time if it runs over. So proposal is we might step through the slides pretty quickly, but then go to the options and give around 15 minutes discussion on each option so that we can hear the feedback. Then just in terms of for visibility, we've got another session with the Strategy and Policy Committee next week on the other topics. We will produce some advice for councillors to consider. And then just finally, this is just an initial conversation to hear your feedback. There's still the opportunity, once we've heard that feedback and we produce some suggested submission points for councillors to review and provide feedback on that too. But what I would say is that for staff to be able to take that step of actually producing the submission points, we do need to understand where council is landing on these options so that we can do that next step. And maybe just the final point is the discussion documents that came out for consultation set out a range of questions. Staff are recommending that we don't just respond to those questions. They're a bit too constraining. And so proposal is that we take the submission points that are most important to you and put them into the submission. So with that, we will go into the session, and I will move through reasonably quickly. So I've covered this off already. We want to hear your views to inform the development of the submission. But just to situate this conversation today, we are talking about national direction under the Phase 2 program. And the reason I mention that is that the Phase 3 program is still going along in parallel. And some of the proposals we see here, particularly around changes to increase efficiency and reduce cost, are because they're trying to set it up for the Phase 3 program too. So it's just something to be mindful of as you're thinking about options. Really all I want to say about this slide is we've got 4 packages. 3 have landed. Package is still to land, and we don't know how the consultation will be run on there. But just to note, we've got changes coming out that will affect national policy statements, national environmental standards and regulations. And so that really means that it's affecting everything from policy and plan making to consenting to environmental monitoring to compliance. So it really has quite extensive implications for the council, and it does mean that we need to give it enough due attention so that we understand where the council wants to position on these matters. So we're only going to talk about 4 topics today, the ones that we've identified as being of higher significance. So that's Te Mana o Te Wai changes, the values and attributes, which are part of the National Objectives Framework, and then wetlands and stock exclusion we've combined together. The stock exclusion part's actually part of the primary sector package, but we've brought it into this discussion because there's a relationship there. And then what we have done is tried to set out some matters that you need to consider when you're looking at these options. And there will be tensions between the different competing outcomes you want to deliver on as a council. And so the idea of framing the conversation under those sort of matters to consider is just to help you think about broadly all those sorts of outcomes you're looking to deliver on. And we have also tried to set out neutrally what the options are and the reasons that you may choose to support an option. The reason for doing that is we're trying to get you, or give you the options as they are, and really just give you that option for discussion rather than leading the conversation. Freshwater package today. One thing to note, the items with the question marks are the items we're talking about today. The items with the green ticks, those are items where we will still be seeking feedback from councillors, but we think that they're less contentious, less significant, and also we've already got some direction, we think, from existing council policy. So that's why they aren't the focus of today's discussion. And so when you are looking at the options proposed under the freshwater package, the things to keep in mind are the extent to which they align with your previous council decisions, the sorts of outcomes you want to deliver for your community and for Canterbury. Thinking about the fact that this is going to transition us to a new system, what do we do to need to be ready to respond? And thinking in that context, particularly around the fact that the government has signalled some changes around reduced consenting, increased compliance, and greater use of non-statutory tools. And then, of course, there's those issues around some of our organisational challenges for Canterbury. So particularly things like consent volumes, smaller funding available, and the need for regulatory efficiency. So I might not discuss that question at the bottom. Are there other questions you wish to weigh up? We can come back to that if you want to. But generally, we think these are the sort of things to be looking at when you are thinking about these options. And just a reminder, Council has endorsed a set of position statements. Those will be relevant in the context of these options today. And as you would expect, some position statements are more relevant to others, but in the whole, they should be considered when you're thinking about options. So in terms of the first proposal, I just want to cover this off briefly before we talk about the options. So the first proposal is to amend the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management and how Te Mana o Te Wai is recognised in that statement. So that concept of Te Mana o Te Wai, which recognises the importance of freshwater to the health and well-being of the wider environment, has been in the MPSFM since the 2014 version, and it's been strengthened over time. The major change here is that the MPSFM 2020 included a more extensive framework with principles and policies, but the item that's actually received the most attention has been the hierarchy of obligations, and that's that framework that prioritises the health and well-being of freshwater and ecosystems above other uses. So in terms of what government is consulting on, they have proposed three options. One is to remove the hierarchy of obligations from the MPSFM 2020. The second is to reinstate Te Mana o Te Wai as expressed in the 2017 version. Now the difference there being that the 2017 version has an objective that requires councils to consider and recognise Te Mana o Te Wai. The language is less directive and less strong. And then the third option is to remove all Te Mana o Te Wai provisions. On the next slide, we haven't included that option because we think that that's fundamentally sort of inconsistent with some of the previous council decisions, particularly around partnership. So that is the reason that's not on the slide. The last thing I'll say before we come to the options is that you'll notice there's no option about just opposing the change, and that's why you'll see that on the third option, is we just want to have that option available for you to consider. So as I mentioned at the start of this, the intent here really is to put out three options, to look at what they would look like, and then to set out reasons why you might as a council choose those options. These are not staff's recommended suggestions. It's simply setting out what you may choose to do. So in terms of that first option of removing the hierarchy, if you did that, you may choose that option because it would enable council to consider environmental, economic, social and cultural outcomes when making decisions around freshwater. And that's because the hierarchy would be removed. An implication of that is that there may be lower costs for resource users and infrastructure providers because you won't require the same level of mitigation to prioritise the health and well-being of freshwater through consents. The second option, and this is the option that's not in the consultation document, is you could simply oppose. Now, the reason you may choose to do that is because it would send a reasonably strong signal to government around your consideration of the importance of that hierarchy and the commitment to partnership. And it also would mean that you would be reducing the risk of weakening environmental protections, which have been put in place to try and deliver on community aspirations for fresh water. And then the third option, which the government has put out, is to reinstate the 2017 version. Now, relevant to note that that would mean we still have a Te Mana o Te Wai framework. We have given effect to that through our freshwater plans already, and it would provide some regulatory certainty for resource users because our plans already give effect to it. And then lastly, the point there is that the 2017 version isn't as prescriptive. So it sets out what's to be achieved when you engage with mana whenua and communities, but not how to do it. So there's a little bit more flexibility in that framework. And so I think I'll pause there so that we can enable the discussion and hear that feedback.
Cool, thanks, Olivia. So we've got about 15 minutes for this. Keen to sort of get everyone's perspective, and I know there might be some questions first, but really keen to know what option you may support so that it does really help Olivia and the team through the submission and get that in the right place. So I had Peter, Claire, Ian and John first, and then we'll go from there.
This is the quintessential political football between parties, the MPSFM, and I think it's always going to be challenged if it remains as a national policy statement, freshwater management, because it can so easily be changed one way to the other. Our first look at this was always about reverting to 2017 because it wasn't as prescriptive as the others. I think it's contentious. The other two issues will be contentious across the country. My personal position on this is 2017 because I think that we've considered 2017 in this building and we were comfortable with it. When Parker came along and made it prescriptive, we were less comfortable with it, and I think that's what's caused the angst. So 3 for me.
Thanks, Peter. Claire?
Yeah, thanks very much, through Chair. For the paper, I was very confused when it was written out because it's not aligning with the discussion paper in the RIS, so found it really confusing. You've tried to help me understand. Just, Olivia, could you please tease out a little bit more around point 4, that if we reverted to the 217 with regarding around the implementation being less prescriptive, because we do have to go and have that conversation with the community and mana whenua in both situations. Is it around the objectives of NOFs and things like that more than anything else?
That's correct. So in terms of, it's actually both parts. So there's prescriptive processes around how you might implement Te Mana o Te Wai, so in the 2020 version around developing the local approach versus 2017 not having those particular parts. There are also prescriptive processes in terms of the processes you must follow when setting limits under the NOF. And there are differences in the language in terms of the timing of when you must engage as well.
So, look, I mean, the concept of Te Mana o Te Wai I'm fine with. I think probably most people would be fine with that. And I think it's a little bit like Councillor Scott may have been alluding to. It's the putting the hierarchy in there, I think, which has caused so much contention and so much issues. And I think it actually has been a barrier to some of our progress and getting some environmental stuff improved. So if option 3, is that the equivalent of option 2 in the government's reckon? Well, it's the closest one, I think, to option 2. Is that correct?
Yeah, and apologies that the option numbers don't match in the document here. Option 3, I'd have to go back and have a look at the option numbers. Option 2 is effectively don't do anything. Option 1 is the option that's been put forward by government, and option 3 is the alternative option around the 2017 version. So the difference between option 1 and option 3 is you'd just be taking out the hierarchy, the 2020 version, as opposed to option 3, where you would be going back to a less prescriptive Te Mana o Te Wai framework, and you would not have those other elements such as the principles and the policies.
So when we looked at it compared to the next slide, which I think around the objectives and the decision we made in the next one actually probably would direct which way we go with this one as far as I see it. So I think we need to come back to this one last. Eh?
I was going to ask is essentially what's the difference in option 1 and option 3. If you go back to 2017, you are removing the hierarchical obligations. So you've answered my question. And I'm still just trying to sort out the muddling between the 3 options you put up there and the options. And I would have thought, actually, if you wanted a sensible discussion, we would have aligned the options that the government is putting in front of us rather than screwing the scrum and making it more complicated. But I'm reasonably relaxed about the MPS of fresh water 2017. We first introduced the concept of Te Mana o Te Wai in the 2010 version of the MPS of fresh water, but just as an attribute. Taking away, I think it's critical that we remove the hierarchy of obligations, and I think we need to clarify, and I support clarifying how we engage with mana whenua and the communities as to how you set those things, and I'm not sure which of the options in the government's discussion paper, but it's somewhere between option 1 and option 3, I think.
Thanks, Ian. John?
Thank you, and I guess I've spent too many hours trying to correlate what we had with, and having read the document and the impact statements and working, and then getting frustrated. I guess if I come back to the regulatory impact statement, then the option 2 there is the one for me, and therefore option 1 within our planning, I could understand why some might want to go back to 2017, but if we could bring some clarity into the 2020 with some clarity and the removal of the hierarchy, I'm probably comfortable there. And I guess I would state, as I've gone through the impact statements themselves, I'm comfortable where government kind of recommendation sits within that space. So option 1 on ours, but I'm very comfortable with option 2 within the impact statement itself. Thanks.
Grant?
Yeah, I'm just looking at option 1, where the item 2 there says enables balancing of environmental, economic, social, and cultural outcomes, and that's exactly what it says in the concept of Te Mana o Te Wai. I was just wondering, in terms of the 6 principles that are in the current framework, if you remove the obligations thing, can those 6 principles still remain in the way that we assess things?
That would be correct. It would be a very discrete amendment to just remove the hierarchy. Yeah.
I mean, I agree. It is this notion of a hierarchy, that this is water first, but I mean, it probably has to be anyway, but it's just the fact that it's there in words. If you remove the words related to that, that's basically the just remove the obligations. Then I think that by keeping option 1, it delivers on the other components of the concept and the framework of the current MPS. So probably in favour of option 1.
Genevieve?
I'm actually more in favour of option 2. Actually just saying it how it is, really. My concern is going with any other option is that based on other elements of reform that we're seeing, we can't analyse the extra risk or extra issues assessment. There's too much unknown, and so I really think we need to be strong and stick to our guns on this and actually say, no, what we've got needs to stay. We've changed so much that we need to have the hierarchy of in order at the moment. That's just my feeling. It just concerns me that anything else could increase demand and supply of resources that are really quite concerningly in a state of either environmental, not mismanagement, but we've got a lot of allocated water at the moment, 97%, I believe, and it just concerns me that if we don't get something sorted and be strong on it, that will have some sort of environmental effects that are worse than what we anticipate.
Thanks, Genevieve. Nick?
Yeah, but like John said, I've read all the documents and yes, a little bit confused. But to me, and I mean, I won't talk for too long because I probably prefer to go down the road of option one.
Thanks, Nick. Other councillors? David?
Yeah, I find it just a little bit confusing when we get a regulatory impact statement put out by the government, and they've got 5 options they were considering, and they're back to front a bit to what this paper is talking about. So I sort of figured out where we're going a wee bit, but look, I probably would be inclined to support option 1 though.
Thanks, David. Any other Greg?
Yeah, sure. Look, I'm quite simply, I cannot in my mind support anything that would weaken environmental protections, which could limit our ability to deliver on community aspirations for freshwater. Freshwater's the number one thing in Canterbury, in the world anyway. I couldn't support anything else.
So what's your option?
It's certainly staying with option 2.
Thank you. Gain?
Come on, there we go. I mean, I empathise with the concern about reducing the amount of protection for water because we aren't where we need to be. But I don't know that making a submission that says we want to stay with option 2 when the government's not put it out as an option is really going to move us very far. We've got to be realistic about what we can actually, about what's most likely to achieve the most for the region in the situation that we find ourselves in. So I think from my reading, like going back to the 2017, seems like one of the advantages that is at least we know how that looks. We've worked within that context before, and I'm quite confident that if we don't make freshwater improvements, we're going to have the same societal backlash that we've seen before. So I feel like it's just a matter of time. Like, you could smart, we'll see that we need to maintain an urgency in this region for improvement. And under that option 3, I think we can make the best of what we can do with that. And hopefully we can get support around this table to go in that direction.
Thanks, Vicky. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, probably similar to the 2 previous speakers. Option 2, having the freshwater first, thinking about the rivers first, etc., and then what's on the rivers, is paramount for myself. But knowing that this government doesn't really care about that. Coming from us, so I'm not a die in a ditch on option 2. However, I mean, if it is going, it would be to option 3. But I mean, it depends. Listening to the council, and I'd say it would be split down the middle if we went for. I don't think there would be a support for option 2, but I mean, I could lean towards option 3 if that was the majority of the council.
Thanks, Jan. Dion, you want
to? Yeah, I'd be just the pickle that this is in, and I think what I'm really interested in is certainty and regulatory for anybody that's using it. So option 3 would be where I'm at. There's so much change going on that I think if we go down that track, if that was the way it would go, we would actually be starting from somewhere not in an unknown.
Thanks, Dion. Joe, have you got
Yeah, I second Vicky's position.
Thank you. Paul, would you like to have a say? Don't have to, of course, but it's given you an opportunity.
No, I'm good.
You're good? Yeah, question's fine.
Which Claire didn't ask, but why is option 1 going to lower costs for resource users and option 3 doesn't? Or do they both do that? You did ask that question, yeah. Oh,
No, I was going to come back and ask it.
They probably both lower costs for resource users. And it's a comparative assessment. So the lowering cost for resource users for option 1 is really in the context of relative to the current MPSFM 2020. Equally, it does apply in terms of the 2017 version because it really is the hierarchy that's the piece that's driving it. Yeah.
I think we're going to carry on. We can come back to questions at the end as well, but we've got 2 more topics to get through, and I'm conscious that it's about 15 minutes. Yeah, we've got 2 more options to get, or whatever options to get through. In terms of where I'm at, yeah, I definitely lean towards option 2, but I like and a bit like Vicky and Joe, I think that that's probably not going to be that useful, but that's definitely where I would like to see things. So I think if there is going to be change, option 3 is the way to go. And like from my numbers that I've got here, I think there's more support, the most support for option 3. So I think you've probably picked up that too. So shall we move on to the next one?
So the next topic concerns the National Objectives Framework. So that's the framework that's in the MPSFM that sets out compulsory values, attributes and bottom lines that must be managed to maintain and improve freshwater. To give you a sense of the difference between the 2020 version and the 2017 version, we had 4 compulsory values in the 2020 version versus 2 in the 2017 version. In terms of attributes, we have around 22 attributes in the 2020 version versus, I think, 11 in the 2017 version. And in terms of national bottom lines, the 2020 version has more stringent limits for nitrate and ammonia. But I would say that in Canterbury we have some significant freshwater challenges, so we're still quite a way from even the national bottom lines in the 2017 version for some of those attributes, such as nitrate. So in terms of this, the government's seeking feedback on which values and attributes should be compulsory versus optional. I would note that through our Plan Change 7, we did actually recognise all of the values in the 2020 MPSFM, so the additional 2 of mahinga kai and threatened species, we've already done that. They're seeking feedback on whether bottom lines are even needed or whether councils should have flexibility to determine that based on community input, and also whether there are circumstances under which you might give some flexibility on monitoring methods. So in terms of the option here, one would be to support the option put forward by government, which is to have the flexibility to decide values, attributes and limits, including the option of not having national bottom lines as a potential. If you do choose that option, that flexibility would mean that you can target your monitoring programs towards those of most significance, so then potentially some cost savings there. If you remove national bottom lines completely, then that does enable some economic and growth opportunities, but obviously impacts for the environment. Does deliver on those position statements that we've talked about around more autonomy for you as a council, and also that position around enabling flexibility at the local level. If you looked at option 2, which is just to retain what's currently there, including national bottom lines, you could do so on the basis that you consider that to be an effective framework and necessary to address Canterbury's freshwater challenges. The national bottom lines have been an important part of the MPSFM for putting a safeguards in place, and we've seen that throughout the 2014 and 2017 version. And then one option we have suggested, and noting that, picking up on the previous discussion, that it's not necessarily always helpful to put forward options, we did want to say there is a middle ground potentially here where you might allow some flexibility. You might decide that national bottom lines are important to retain, but also that you want some less prescription around some of the processes. So some of the benefits of that is we've already implemented national bottom lines and the NOF through our freshwater plans, so we have that regulatory certainty again. And it's also delivering some of those benefits around regional autonomy and decision making and flexibility to potentially have monitoring programs that are actually looking at the attributes of most significance. So I might just turn that over to discussion now.
Olivia. So let's go similar to last time. We did it pretty good last time within that 15 minutes, so let's keep going. Ian, you were first.
Yeah, look, I try not to be long-winded, but when we first did the first National Objectives Framework, I was on the reference working group, and the purpose of national bottom lines, which I support, was to set the worst-case scenario, and I support that. Where we went wrong, where the government went wrong in 2020, was that it then set a whole lot of aspirational goals, which then took the community out of actually being able to set what were the right goals for their communities in terms of aspirational, water bodies they wanted to protect and others where they accepted there were going to be issues. And the advantage of the original National Objectives Framework is that you didn't need exceptions other than for natural causes like lahars and things. Everybody they applied across the whole of New Zealand, which was the basis of a national framework. I'm very happy to retain the national framework, but the attribute limits have to be achievable. And so the 2017 or earlier versions in the MPS for freshwater did that. Where the 2020 version went wrong is it set compulsory attributes as a bottom line, which were unattainable in a huge number of waterways. And so it made a nonsense to the process, and I think that was a pity. Remembering also that the MPS for freshwater talks about maintain and improve as a bottom line. And I think what I objected to the most is when various NGOs and political parties dismissed maintain and improve as something they couldn't achieve, and therefore they didn't recognise that as a critical component of the MPS for freshwater. And having read these three options, I'm not sure which option that sits in.
Yeah, where you go, Olivia. You give us a bit of a feedback.
Yeah. So I think that probably sits best with the alternative, which is potentially to go to more flexibility. So it's consistent with what the government has said. Maybe a 2017 MPSFM NOF framework with bottom lines. So those three components. That would probably be the option there. The thing we are trying to do here is that there are nuances around each of these options, but I think what I'm hearing from you would be 2017 national bottom lines and
the bottom lines have to be set so that there is no excuse for exceptions by setting the attribute levels at unattainable levels. 6.7 for 6.9 or whatever it was for nitrates is attainable even in the Hines at a stretch. But 2.4 is never going to happen in a lot of lowland drains.
Claire?
I think John was first, but okay. So yeah, my question's the same really. God, I'm just scanning something, scanning the RIS at the same time, because my sense is option 3, and I know I just said before I would make that decision up when we got to this because it's integral part of Te Manawatu. But I'm sort of feeling I agree with Ian. I think that we do need some bottom lines, but they have to be achievable, and we know there's plenty of science come out since then. 2020 NPS come out of examples where, be it phosphorus or N or whatever, that basically, and we're not going to be achieved nationally anyway, let alone some of our own areas which we know about. So I guess I'm just thinking really, and I was trying to flick through and see whether they were talking about it, is there some flexibility going to be around those national bottom lines? Have they indicated that from your reading or your understanding?
So the option they've put out there is no bottom lines or flexibility for communities to determine them. And the other option, I guess, is that you look at reverting back to something like a 2017 is the other option.
Well, I'm a bit like Ian. I mean, I think you do need some sort of bottom lines, but they can't be so aspirational that one or two of them can't be achieved. So I'm probably in the alternative space.
Thank you. John?
Thanks, and having said that, I'm very comfortable with all the objectives and recommendations of government. I could absolutely accept the alternative, because I do have a nervousness about no bottom lines being in there. And when we were going through the zone process and the numbers and the nitrates and the levels, they were the bottom line, but there was aspiration to improve over. So I think we have to be well aware in the conversation, while the bottom line is there, that's the absolute, but it doesn't stop us looking to achieve and go beyond. It doesn't mean that we will regulate beyond, but it doesn't take away the aspiration. So I would be comfortable with an option 2 that has a bottom line, and probably back to a 2017 if that was a way forward, if that could be taken account of as kind of a community flexibility that we have in there. So yeah, 1 would be but 2, I'm quite happy with 2. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Nick? Oh, you mean the
I'm
alternative?
probably,
Yeah, 1 and then alternative. Yeah, cool. Nick?
yeah, I'm probably like the previous 2 or 3 speakers.
Sorry, people.
The
Hey,
alternative.
we're trying to listen to Nick. Nick, start again. Sorry, Nick. There you go.
Excuse me. I sort of agree with the 2 or 3 previous speakers. I'd be pretty keen to go down the alternative road and around back to the 2017. Personally, I'm a little bit worried about our bottom lines and where nitrogen and phosphate levels may sit. So I think we do need to. There is a need of a bottom line. So yeah, no, definitely alternative.
Thank you. Go around the table, Jan. It was encouraging to hear that bottom lines are required. So I'm very pleased for this council at the moment. Yeah, point 2 on option 1, that really scares me. Removal of national bottom lines would enable economic and growth opportunities, but impact for environment outcomes. That really scares me. So option 1 is gone completely. I mean, as we know, this option 2, that's where probably I sit, and probably people around this council know that. But I mean, if we're going to go there and go to the government, I mean, the reaction we're probably going to get is close the door, so to speak. So I'm probably more, option 2 leaning towards alternative, similar to the things. We need those national bottom lines somewhere, because otherwise the degradation of our environment will be very impacted on. Kia ora. Cool. Vicky, thank you.
Yeah, we definitely have to retain national bottom lines. I think it's really clear that not having those at the outset when the RMA was introduced has got us into the pickle that we're now in, and why it is that healthy freshwater is beyond our ambition. But I think the alternative option, whilst I again feel like option 2, and those bottom lines in the 2020 are science-based with some shift actually to allow for economic and recognition of the reality, and there was a long time frame allowed, and there was a generation of change in order to achieve them, which when you put the time frames in, things shouldn't be seen as impossible. Of those sorts of decadal time frames, it should be entirely possible, and those, there are some in the science community who are actually pushing for substantially less than the 2.4. But I think in the reality of things at the moment, the alternative option is the one that we should be focusing on at this point.
We can do better than 6.9. That would be good.
Thanks, Genevieve. Grant?
Just a couple of queries. First of all, on the compulsory values, does the alternative option retain the compulsory values that are in the current NPS?
No.
So the alternative is one that we've sort of put forward. So there's the option, I guess, as to how far we want to push on that. The one thing I would say is that even if you choose just to retain the 2 compulsory versions in the 2017 version, note that we've actually already done the additional 2 through our planning process. So we've already done Mahinga Kai and threatened species. So that's already given effect too.
Okay, so we've got flexibility to add in values that habitat, water quantity, all that sort of stuff.
You can go above and beyond, can't you, Olivia, in any of this?
Well,
So.
I mean, I think that's so important. And the other thing, the Appendix 1B, other values that must be considered, natural form and character. So they are potentially something that we can do to extract out of this one because they're good and suit Canterbury's state. I'm probably going to head to the alternative because of what you're suggesting is that we can have some control over the national bottom lines, because the national bottom lines at the moment, my understanding is that they're kind of lower than what our current standards are in some cases, which is a bit of a worry. I mean, for me, the thought of allowing anything higher than 2.4 is a disaster. And some of those high limits that we have were created without the knowledge of the environmental effects that was causing and is still causing. So for me, being able to have a community focus on making sure they are aspirational, and the achievability of that is what we do to limit whatever's causing the damage.
Thanks, Grant. Can we move on, because we've got to get through
sorry.
it. Yep. Greg.
Yeah, given this is not a real vote, I don't have to compromise my principles. But I look at option 2. Communities have expressed clear desire for freshwater improvement. If we don't support that, then we're not supporting people. Again, I sound like a broken record, but that is the number one issue for people in Canterbury is water, fresh water. So I'm option 2. Again, it's the luxury of not being a real vote.
All good. Well, sort of is, but where you go, David?
Yeah, I'm a little torn between option 1 and the alternative. I could live with either.
Thank you. Dale?
Yeah, I'm in the alternative point 3. Regulatory certainty is really important for me at this point in time. So I'll support that.
Cool, thank you. Joe?
2.
Cool. And Paul?
2, but I'd say very much like Greg, we could do better. We should do better.
Cool, thanks, Paul. Yeah, I think you got an overwhelming majority there for the alternative, and I think that is the best way to give something some constructive difference to what's been put forward with some evidence from us. I'm a bit like I definitely would be happy with option 2, but realise that it's not as probably constructive as option 3. And I would lean towards, having aspirational targets are not a problem for me, especially if they have long timeframes. That's fine. So that's where I sit personally. But I think you've got the answer and the guidance that you need to do the next steps. So thank you. Let's go to the wetland one.
So this is actually a combined proposal that we brought to you today because it's wetlands and stop exclusion. So a couple of key proposals. One is allowing construction of artificial wetlands as a permitted activity. And just to note, we don't know what the conditions look around permitted activities around this at the moment. The second is to allow access by non-intensively farmed beef, cattle and deer into wetlands, including those wetlands that support threatened species. And then 2 changes to the definition of natural wetland. The first is around induced wetlands. So those are things where a wetland forms from, for example, a burst pipe. That's the sort of example that's talked about in the discussion document. The second change is more relevant, I think, for Canterbury, which is government's looking to remove the piece of the definition around natural wetlands that would exempt wet pasture from being considered a wetland. And the thing to note about that is that we have a similar exclusion in our Land and Water Regional Plan because of some of the particular challenges. And when this council submitted on the last discussion document, it did support having a pasture exclusion. So I just put that out there so you're aware of that. And then along with those changes, they are suggesting some amendments to rules in the NES, which would allow farming activities to be carried out closer to wetlands, so things like fencing, irrigation and on-farm water storage, rather than having to have those activities go through a consent pathway. And then finally, they would remove the requirement for councils to map wetlands within 10 years. I would note that we've actually done a lot of work in that space already, so that particular provision doesn't impact on us as much, given we've already done that work. So, and again, it's a bit tricky here because we've got proposals in one package which relate to proposals in another. But essentially, the options we could look at is to enable those proposals for wetland construction as a permitted activity. That would align with sort of the direction that council has talked about through Plan Change 8. And it would sort of incentivise that opportunity for things like delivering on biodiversity outcomes and partnership outcomes. There would be lower transaction costs for resource users, and one of the things, if we think about one of the challenges for our council, is the consenting volume. So we could, it would mean that our consent teams could focus on those activities that potentially have higher significant effects. So option 2 is the complete opposite, which is, well, not complete opposite. You'd still support the wetland construction as permitted activity, but oppose greater leniency around farming near wetlands and the stock exclusion provisions. You might choose to do that if you were concerned that any sort of relaxation of wetland rules could jeopardise those. And it also just is relevant to note that in our sub-regions we do have some more restrictive rules around stock exclusion in wetlands, so I just want you to note that. And then the last would be support wetland construction, support some permitted activity rules for low impact farming, so that's the things like fencing, irrigation, on-farm storage, but maybe look at how farm plans could be used to regulate those low impact activities as an alternative tool, which would help also address our consenting load. And thirdly, requiring stock exclusion from wetlands or wetlands with threatened species. That's something to be talked about. That's where the nuance comes in. So those are really the options for consideration here.
Thanks, Olivia. Anyone want to be brave and go first on this one? Ian?
Why not? I'm quite good at making a fool of myself. And I haven't quite worked out which option I favour, other than I think we should. I certainly favour moving away from the consent requirements, more permitted activities. I noted when we were in the Mackenzie country that the run holder we visited was using halter collars to regulate how their cattle went into waterways and rivers and wetlands, and that sort of technology we need to think about in terms of what options you choose in this case, because QE2 Trust opposed the exclusion of stock from wetlands inside their covenanted trusts because, in fact, their view was that judicial grazing of cattle in wetlands at times of the year controlled a lot of exotic weeds and things like that. So, and so I think, our rules should think about the new technologies that are available for it to allow some sort of grazing. So stock exclusion rules are probably in the high country and in low impact grazing systems are probably inappropriate when there's other technologies which I hadn't thought about until we were in Mackenzie the other day, may be more applicable. So I think we should be enabling more permitted activities, whichever of those options, trying to read them, but it's somewhere between 2 and alternative, I think.
Let's just go around the table, Dion.
I've got a question on the option 2 there, the lenient rules for farming and stock exclusion. Are we just talking about stock farming, or is it like growing food farms and...
So there's 2 separate proposals. So one is the proposal for more lenient rules around the fencing and the irrigation, the on-farm water storage. Those are the examples given. And then there's a separate proposal around just stock exclusion specifically. Other activities around sort of growing food they haven't talked about specifically in the discussion document. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's fine. I think I'm Probably leaning more towards option 2, to be fair.
And Peter, sorry, I don't think I came back to you on the last one. Sorry, but you can say that now.
Big
if you
day,
want.
Craig. It's a
Add to
big
it.
day. Look, I'm really, and I'm not sure where this fits, but I'm really pleased that if wetland construction could be more permissive than it has been in the past, because that was one of the the issues we have, is that the rules around setting up a wetland was so costly, people were just steering away from it. And, you know, we had discussions with farmers who wanted to do wetlands, and all they need to do is essentially what they need to do is put a fence around it and walk away from it. Possibly not quite that simple, but I'm quite happy to see a more permissive activity. But I think the point that's made about farm plans is also important, because I think that where it intersects with possibly a more intensive type farming practice, farm plans would be a way of actually not keeping an eye on it, but ensuring that it was part of a holistic system for a farm, rather than just, you know, I've got a wetland because I need a wetland sort of thing. So, yeah, and not everyone needs wetlands, but that's what I think.
Have you got an option that you'd support?
I don't know where that fits. Maybe the alternative one.
Okay.
Alternative, maybe.
Joe? Okay, thanks, Ian. Yeah, Joe?
Yeah, option 2, but also alternative as well.
Cool, thank you. Claire, are you good?
No, I'm not good. I would like a better understanding of when the government's talking about pasture exclusion, what that actually means. And I know that we've had lots of discussions here in the previous triennium, 2 trienniums actually, before this council around how we actually deal with wet pasture in what some people will then call wetlands, and it's a real contentious subject. So I've still got some real questions around that, and I don't know whether it's something that you might come back at a next...
What option of the ones, sorry Claire, of the ones that are up there would speak to what Claire's saying? What do you think, Olivia?
To be fair, we haven't actually talked about the definition in these options here. I guess there's a question as to whether or not we want to retain the previous council's position, which is to support a pasture exclusion, on the basis that that's what we went through with our communities through our sort of previous processes. So we haven't put that on the option because, as we've talked about, there's so many components to all these wetland changes, but that is a question we would be welcoming some guidance on as to whether or not you support that previous position around pasture exclusion.
So through you, Chair, I just wonder if it might be appropriate to bring that specific bit back, if we could, and have a bit more information from the back, you know, previous history. Because as I stand at the moment, I think is it more than 50% or something of exotic pasture is not considered wetland. So just to get an understanding and the implications. So I'm sort of 1 in 3. I think for me there are some wetlands. I mean, we know we've got some science. I know in the Lees Valley there was a court case, in fact, over a wetland there, and stock accessing that and the value around having periodic grazing, and I know that exists somewhere else. I know that fencing stock out of wetlands in some of our hill country, and particularly high country, is just a huge ask where it's non-intensive farming. So I do wonder around the value of that. So I'm probably a little bit about more permissive rules and regs in that space. So I guess I'm probably leaning to 3, but yeah, we'll see where it goes.
Thanks, Claire. I know it is a bit tricky. John?
Thanks. Just some thoughts. Just reading through the impact statement again, and there were some comments from Lynn's and others, and I actually had a conversation with the Deputy Director of Lynn's last night, and the challenges around grazing for pines and wilding pines, and how you apply some of those rules, and they make those notes again in the regular impact statement of going, if we are too bound up and tight, yes, we will fence and preserve. But we saw a Fish and Game presentation this morning around all the work that was done to then take the willows out of the wetlands. So I think there's which possibly can be fenced. But I come back to Councillor McKenzie and the work that the substools are doing, and a cousin-in-law of mine was out looking at that same technology for a large station in the North Island of just how it can manage stock. So there are opportunities and technologies coming along that will really assist us. And if the government is looking at reducing legislation, reducing the compliance costs and challenges, then I think something in the alternative really does sort of sit there of going, can we put it into farm plans? Can we advocate for technology if you're in a really sensitive place where you can virtually fence stock out? And it comes to another question I've been asked over the 18 months around Te Waihora. We must fence to keep stock away from the lake edge, but can we use now the new technology? So where is our thinking as an organisation on virtual fencing and technology as opposed to hard fences and the like? So there's a broader question in there, but I'm happy with one, but equally happy with the alternative if that's where it lies. Reducing the compliance, but trying to achieve similar outcomes, particularly in that low-intensity farming
Thanks,
space.
John. So just a question, Olivia. What you've said about what we've previously done through our planning process, what option does that align with most? Can you just confirm that?
It is a little bit dependent on which plan change we're talking about. I would say if we're thinking about plan change 8, obviously there's the intent around the construction, so let's put that aside.
That's more about stock exclusion, but...
Yeah, so in terms of the stock exclusion rules, we have some catchments at the moment where we have more stringent rules around extensive stock. Our region-wide rules and the use of farm plans around wetlands is more aligned with the alternative, but it kind of depends where you are in the catchment.
Thank you. Yeah. So, Olivia, with that, but I mean, and I suppose we look at GMP, right? Bottom number 4 promotes exclusion of stock from wetlands. So you're saying our general rules in the land and water at the moment is kind of more to the alternative route. Is that what you're saying? So where does GMP fit in with that?
Yeah, so generally GMP at the moment is reflected in our farm environment plan frameworks as a requirement to implement good management practice for farms that require a consent. Some of the low intensity farms may not require a farm environment plan, but there's also a requirement in our plan for farms to prepare management plans and implement GMP. So I would say that generally we're more aligned to the alternative that we've put up there. Yeah.
Oh, okay, so I mean, if it was the alternative, there, so the smaller farms would have to kind of, they would be brought into it.
The difference would be that if we went with the alternative, it would be saying, yes, it's fine to have some permitted rules. If you can't meet those rules, then there might be circumstances where you need to manage the impacts through a farm plan, noting that this government is looking to potentially use those not just in a consented system. So going forward, yeah.
Always, option 2, but, with that quarter and that clarification, it could swing to the alternative. Thanks, Sharon. Vicky?
Just to clarify, so where we've got rules that go beyond where the alternative might go currently, those would then become defunct with this? No. Or not until we change our land and water regional plan?
It's a really good question. So at the moment they would stay as they are. What we know from some of the other proposals government has put forward is that there's the potential that they may start to put more stringent controls on when you can be more stringent in your plans. And in fact, some of the other proposals that I'll talk to you next week around commercial forestry, we're starting to see that. So for now, we can retain our rules. We just don't know where the government will go in terms of that stringency aspect. Yeah.
Yep.
This is framed in the national direction. So I guess it's a follow-on. How direct is that direction or absolute? And yes, we can go beyond. But is there a risk or a point where government will say that is the direction, that is the rule, and therefore you will amend your plans to give effect to our directions? kind of, yes, it's in play at the moment, but is there a point where national direction will become national direction and we have to give effect to, as opposed to, I won't use those words, do what we want to do?
Yeah, and we always do have to give effect to national policy statements and make sure our plan rules are consistent with national environmental standards. The point at which that would happen is when the government gets these proposals through the parliamentary process and gazettes them and says, from this date you must implement. How long that period will be will depend on how quickly they roll through phase 3 RM reforms. Yeah.
Thanks, John. Vicky, back to you.
Yeah, so I mean, just firstly, just to really say how important all wetlands are. We're down to 10% of, I think it's 10% of what there was. So even the ones that aren't maybe that amazing, don't have anything particularly threatened, are still really valuable in their function in the natural environment, and we shouldn't underestimate that. Also, having seen wetlands that have had stock getting in around the edges, like they really can really quickly do damage, but recognizing also that there are, as we have about the QE2 trust, it can be a management tool as well. So it's finding the right line. The farm plans, I think, and permitted activities have absolutely got a place, but it's really within the context of how well compliant people are. So, and it's difficult because I know we're trying to uplift our compliance and put more, and we talked about this the other week about, shifting to and more enabling, but with more compliance. So it seems like that alternative helps to move us to that, because that was the question I asked, is how do you, there's a gap here, how do you move from one to the other and not let things fall through a crack in the interim? And so, yeah, it's hard. I mean, the alternative, I can see how that can operate, but only in a really strong compliance, including compliance for permitted activities. And quite often I think aren't being done within the permitted rules. And often those are the things that don't necessarily get seen because we're not visiting those places as often as we would do when we go out and we visit consent and check people are in compliance with their consent conditions. So I think I'd really like staff to think really carefully about where we pitch this, somewhere option 2 or alternative, but I think with that really strong message that, one, it's such valuable habitat even when it's not pristine wetland because we've got such a diminished amount of it, and 2, that it's in the context, wherever we land, it's in the context of really us being able to manage the compliance.
Genevieve?
Pretty much along the lines of what Vicky was saying. I've just got a probably concern about sort of permitted activities and sort of farm plans being used instead of more potential stringent rules and consent processes, because I guess what I don't think we need to see is sort of I guess the red and orange zones that are, over allocated or got really high nutrient loads being put into a state of being worse, or there's just so much coming at us, and also self-regulatory space. We definitely don't want people in those zones to start doing their own thing or just reporting on things themselves. Which leads on to what Vicky was saying. We need to have better oversight of the activities and making sure that best practice at least is happening. It's a really concerning space for me. I don't feel comfortable with a lot of what's been discussed. And I think you've done a good job bringing this forward though. But options, probably 2, but it needs to be a little bit more tweaked, so maybe alternative as well.
Thanks, Genevieve. Grant?
I think probably the alternative, more so because it's the use of farm plans. And if we're heading down more of a non-statutory approach to things in a spatial context, sub-catchment, you're looking at the effects on farm, but also the effects of something. It could be a chain of constructed wetlands or wetland protections along a waterway on various farms within a subcatchment. So it is enabling us, in my mind, to look at things a little bit outside the square. So maybe there is some reference within that reasoning about the wording related to catchment, sub-catchment planning processes that enables you to deliver the outcomes, which are the essential thing in this.
Greg?
I think I'm quoted in Seven Rivers Walking, that was a film in the New Zealand Film Festival a couple of years ago, as saying every farm could have one of these, and that was in relation to a biotinode style wetland. So I'm all for constructing wetlands. I've just spent 13 years at Tuhaitara doing that, and the benefit is huge. Having said that, though, as a poor charitable trust at the start of my employment there, the trust saw fit to have some out-of-season grazing by cattle through the northern end, about 100 hectares from Tutaipatu Lagoon, and it was horrendous. Yes, it stopped any willow regrowth coming away, but it absolutely pugged up and destroyed, and not to mention other values, cultural values that it, I was going to say literally shit on. So I'm kind of torn. I think we need to be able to offer the opportunity for constructing more wetlands, but I also think there's a line about safeguarding them. As far as stock goes, I know City Council did pretty well with those Campbell Island sheep that they had, as far as things like stopping exotic grasses growing through. I know we had issues around things like salt-tolerant herb fields, which exotic grass would get away, and then you would literally have to graze, the only way to protect it. So where am I at? Don't know. 2, alternative. Kia ora. Thanks.
David?
Thanks. I don't often agree with Councillor Burns, but...
you should more often.
But I just want to talk about option 1, and I think option 1.1 sort of drifts across all the proposals. And I think everyone around the table seems to be in favour of enabling better rules for the construction of wetlands, and the associated benefits. For me, I think the sticking point with most of these options comes around exclusion of stock from wetlands. And we've heard... I think Claire might have brought it up initially about the methodology that's evolving now for stock control, harnesses, those sort of things for actively restricting stock to get into areas that you don't want them, is something that's quite an advance in technology, and I think will become more and more a tool that's going to be used. How we recognise that in our submission on this sort of activity, I'm not sure. So I actually like option 1, but we are perhaps a little restricted in some of the methodology that may evolve to be included in this sort of statement that we can use to keep stock out of wetlands. So I like option 1 if we can sort of somehow or other incorporate this new technology that's evolving. Otherwise, I find the alternative is probably my next best option. But
cool. Thanks, David. Nick?
Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, the thing is we want a process as enabling, and I guess the start of option 1 sort of alludes to that. But I think we've talked, other councils talked about virtual fencing and holder collars, and they are becoming quite a big thing here in the Mackenzie. Farmers both intensive dairy farmers and extensive beef farmers are using them to keep stock out of waterways, out of wetlands, away from sensitive areas. So it's how our organisation recognises that in the future. Is a virtual fence okay, or do we actually need to have a physical fence? And I think it needs to be, the process needs to be permissive. And so probably for me, it's probably the alternative is my preferred option.
Cool, thanks, Nick. Paul?
Yeah, I'd probably go with 2, but I'd prefer something better. But if these are our options, then I'd go with 2.
Thanks, Paul. I think we've gone around everybody. I do like 2, but I think the alternative again has got the majority support. People feel comfortable with that. I'm interested in but like Claire, the actual definition of what wetland means when it comes to stock exclusion. I know an example out by Waihora where we set a line through our land and water plan, which we were pretty happy with, and then the previous government's proposal then set another line, and that wiped out part of a property there that because they had not developed their land and turned it into a centre pivots and all that, they were sort of actually disincentivised from continuing to farm that land. So I'm hoping that the alternative can help that situation by requiring stock exclusion from an actual wetland, not just some wet land. if that makes sense. If you want,
virtual fencing.
If it becomes a permitted activity to actually construct wetlands on farm and ponds and that sort of thing, if they're not fenced, how do we manage incidents on farm, like with children and things like that?
Not within the scope of our functions and responsibilities, really. It's more of a work-safe matter. I get the point you're raising. It's just probably not within our sphere.
Remember when we talked about our potential PC8 work, there is even though it's permitted activity, there is conditions that still need to be met to get to the permitted activity. I don't know if it helps that particular issue, but there are some conditions that they have to achieve to get that. And so we don't know what the government's actually planning on this yet, but we've obviously got some stuff that's in train that could be helpful. John?
Just I guess a follow-up on the Mackenzie stuff and subtools are now using the technology to graze the islands in the river. And previously stock were excluded, and that was the rules. And then people had to go back under the cover of darkness and go, actually, we've got all this gorse and broom and crap on those islands that were the nesting habitat, and cattle had to be snuck back in when no one was looking to take the scrub out to then provide the nesting habitat for birds. And that was an issue all the way down the Ahuriri where stock was excluded. And then we were spending tens of thousands of dollars on sprays and helicopters to free up those fairways for nesting birds. So I think we're all in the same direction, but what is the outcome that we're looking for in some of these places? Do we create a millstone and actually go backwards in some of our thinking? So they were just real life examples on the Ahuriri of losing all that bird habitat and nesting area because we had excluded stock completely. So the ability to put them back in a managed space ensured that we did have those gravel beds and those nesting areas at the critical times. So just how we manage the process rather than blanket rules does become critical in time.
Yeah, I think we want outcomes where it avoids what sort of Greg told us about, where it does actually matter, where it does cause problems within true wetlands. I think that's the issue. We do want to protect that, but allow for those other outcomes that can be achieved where that's not an issue. So I think if you can take that, then that's good. But I think, again, the alternative's got the most support. So, cool. Yeah.
And so that would just mean a bit of definition around what wetlands there that we would require exclusion from.
Yeah. Cool. I know there's a few more slides, but I think they're all pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, that was the key, but I know we've gone over a little bit. So you got any other things you want to tell us, next steps, or we move on to the next one?
Just that we will take this and the feedback from the next session, and it's at that point that you'll see the table with the sort of suggested submission points. So that'll be in the next couple of weeks
Cool.
that you'll hear from us.
Sweet. Thank you. Cheers. So 18th of June, next session, 7th of July, we'll get the draft submission, and then 23rd at S&P will look to approve it. Thank you. Awesome. Great work and really helpful summarising of the changes. Thanks, Olivia and Terry. It's awesome. Thank you. We'll get straight into it with Andrew, Taff and Lisa and anyone else who's coming up. And really appreciate your patience and letting us go a little bit longer on that. This is a course about integrated planning and where we may be at, and of course noting the national direction changes that we've had, plus the RMA sort of signal. So hand it over to you, Taff. Kia ora.
Kia ora, councillors again. Just so Andrew's sent his apologies up, he's actually up in Wellington, the special interest group meeting. So Lisa is going to cover most of this, but what I did want to do just very quickly, and we don't normally spend a lot of time on these framing of presentation slides, was just to cover some of the things that's got us to where we are now, and then Lisa's going to take it from here. And obviously you've just heard the complexity of what's coming in terms of the national direction. So, but I just wanted to quickly cover some of these points here, because the backstory is why we are where we are and what we've got in the LTP, and then Lisa's been doing some hard work then reshaping what the planning program looks like, which is what she'll talk about. So it's just quickly doing the step backwards here that we've got starting back in March 2022. As you're well aware, we started the review in partnership of the RPS. We then had a notice of motion in 2024 regarding the targeted review of the coastal plan. We then confirmed in May how we'd be going forward on that. Some targeted changes to be notified in 2026. We've got the long-term plan and amendments in there, and the integrated plan development, and then we've got the decision that came to pause the RPS. So it's just really looking at, we've had a number of changes already, and so where we started with the LTP is now changed significantly already, and say Lisa's been doing some good work then trying to resize what future looks like, given that we've still with that I'll hand straight over to Lisa.
Right, so really the purpose is just to provide a bit of an overview of how that plan development work program has adapted in response to some of these changes signalled in national direction over the last few years. Okay, so the 2024 LTP set out a really large work program, plan development work program, to occur between 2024 and 2029. And the work program was designed in part to meet our responsibilities to give effect to the NPSFM, and it also included completing the regional policy statement review, Plan Change 8, investigating options for resource. As with the previous planning work programs, there was a high degree of uncertainty due to changing legislation and national direction. Significant change has been occurring since the Essential Freshwater Package was introduced in 2020, and followed by the introduction and then repeal of the new resource management legislation. And then since we've also had just continued changes to national policy, regulations and legislation. And this means that we've had to continually adapt the planning work program while maintaining a focus on delivering outcomes for our community. So in November 2024, we started seeing some of those significant changes in the current government had been signalling beginning to take shape. And in response, we paused the development of the regional policy statement. And we've also, since that time, been working with MFE to progress Plan Change 8. We've now received consultation packages on changes to the national direction, and significantly for the plan development program, we're seeing intent to amend the Te Manaoti Wai provisions and the national objective framework within the NPSFM. We've been expecting this for some time, and you'll recall that when we were drafting the RPS, we were careful to draft it in a way that was adaptable to that change, focusing much more on outcomes for Canterbury than really on embedding that hierarchy of obligations. Importantly, the changes to the NPSFM and the signals that we've long been receiving mean that the immediate need to reset limits and targets using the very prescriptive and intensive community engagement process set out in the NOF have been removed. And we'll talk about what that means for the work program in the next few slides. There's also open consultation on changes to the NZCPS, signalling some clarification and opening of pathways for infrastructure, aquaculture and research in the CMA. And those changes are reflective of some precedent-setting court findings, and as such, they were also somewhat anticipated in the RPS drafting. Work underway on the coastal plan review, including the identification and mapping of significant areas for biodiversity, natural character and other values, will ensure that we're really well placed to direct protection and development into the right areas in the coastal environment. So in the National Direction Consultation Package, we've also seen greater use of national standards or regulations to achieve outcomes. And the timing of that's really useful because we're going to have a much better view of the tools that will be in play for achieving outcomes as we work through the plan development process over the next few years, with a particular focus on reducing the complexity of the planning framework. And while we've not yet seen the draft of the new RMA, there have been some clear signals that a future planning framework will include a single plan per region containing a spatial plan chapter, a natural resources chapter, and chapters for each of the districts. And we're turning our mind to how the draft RPS might be expressed in part through the spatial plan, noting that a function of the RPS and the spatial plan are pretty similar in that they both provide long-term vision for resource use and development within the region. And as we've previously discussed, the expectation for a natural environment chapter within a single regional plan will be significantly more streamlined than our current 7 plans. So in 2020, the Essential Freshwater Package did 2 key things. It reset priorities for freshwater that in Canterbury had previously been set by the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, and it required that those new priorities be reflected in plans by 2024. So in response, we designed a really ambitious work program to deliver that, which included a full review of the regional policy statement and the land and water plans by 2024. But by mid-2022, it was pretty clear that we weren't going to be able to deliver that entire work program, and Council made a commitment at that time to focus first on review of the regional policy statement and then continue the limit and target resetting process from 2024 to 2028. But in 2024, the 2024 long-term plan set out the work program to deliver that limit and target resetting. It was primarily designed to give effect to those responsibilities under the NPSFM. It was a massive piece of work, and we identified through the LTP process a need to significantly increase the resourcing for the planning program in order to deliver it. But there were also those other ongoing bits of work that we're committed to, including completing the review of the regional policy statement, initiating targeted changes to the coastal plan and the changes to the land and water plan. So these highlighted work items are directly sort of related or driven by the NPSFM 2020, and those are those kind of sub-regional limit setting process bits. And then we've got some other pieces of the planning work program that are also impacted by national direction change. And then what this means is that in response, we've redesigned the work program so that we can continue delivering Council's direction, including reviewing that coastal plan and reviewing the land and water plan framework. But it means that we've stopped or paused some pieces of work. So the the RPS is paused and PCH has sort of slowed down while we've been working through with the ministry. We're not gearing up to do that sort of 13 FMU sub-regional limit setting process, and that's a big chunk of work that we've hit pause on. But what we are doing instead is having a really good close look at what's working and what's not working in the plan framework and how we can reduce the complexity while improving implementability. So really the focus of the plan development work program at the moment is on that foundational work, gathering knowledge, analysing issues and options, particularly in the coastal environment where we're doing some work sort of mapping significant ecological areas, significant natural areas and those sorts of things, so that we can really sort of move forward on the coastal plan review. We're also looking at how we can be more efficient and effective in delivering community agreed outcomes, and that really comes down to, are we putting the effort in the right place in terms of the things that we as an organisation are doing and what we're asking community to do. And we're looking at how we can reduce complexity in the plan framework, and that's everything from standardising measurement units and monitoring requirements, removing duplication of policies and rules, and improving the line of sight between action and outcome. We're also looking at how we can enable smarter regulation, so digitising to enable automation of some of our processes, in particular freshwater accounting, but that could go further as well, looking at automating some other processes. And we're looking at using the tools that will become available to us under new legislation, and spatial planning in particular is really key there. So we'll be back in July with a bit of a scope of what we're actually looking at sort of in the plan framework, so a bit more sort of topic-based scope. We'll also come talk to you about a consents review that we're getting underway, and back in August as well to talk about what parts of the coastal plan would recommend progressing through the targeted changes in that first tranche. So I'm sort of happy to respond to any questions now.
Thanks, Lisa. Dion, and then Peter.
I'm just looking at the LTP, the development work program resized. You've got the Section 35, but I thought when we agreed to do the Section 35, we were replacing, well, not replacing, but it was instead of that Waitaki standalone plan investigation. Is that still going on? Okay.
Did you want to answer that?
Yeah. I don't think it was replacing that work. It was whether or not we included the Waitaki.
So the investigation work on the Waitaki isn't necessarily about the plan, but look at the holistic management of the catchment. That working group still exists, and a reset hui is coming up. So after that, we'll have more clarity on what the next steps will be. But as far as we're concerned from a work perspective, the Section 35 assessment will be rolled, for our part of the catchment, will be rolled into the regional Section 35 assessment.
And just so everyone knows, like, there's still an outstanding couple of other points that we made that day on continuing to meet with Otago Regional Council and the Papatipi Ruranga and stuff. So that'll help clarify where things go to next, I think, too. But the Section 35 obviously would help what we do next on that one as well as across the region. So I think that's what I understand. Peter?
Yeah, I don't know where this fits, but given that some regulatory changes are coming our way, and given that we've got so many confusing consents that cost a lot of money and take a lot of time to get, is there any work going on looking at how we can do one of two things? One, take the cost out. I guess we've got to wait to see what the regulatory brings us on that. But the other thing, I guess the criticism is, and it has been for a while, to us anyway, in the rural sector, is that when consents are given, even if they're just turnover consents and there's not a lot of risk associated with them, you used to be able to get them for extended periods like 30. I had a 35-year consent. And I know the reasoning why we've come down and shortened that time frame. But is there any work at all going on saying that we should be able to extend those out to a 15 to 20-year period where there's no risk? The problem that we have, if we can't do that, is the uncertainty that exists in terms of economic development around consents that are required for intergenerational transfers and those sorts of things. And the other bit was, we'd talked, I guess, internally about an omnibus to our land and water plan to try and actually iron out some of that stuff. So have you got a comment on that? I don't want you to hold your feet to the fire on that one at all, but I mean, I'm interested in that.
Yeah, so when we're sort of talking about streamlining and simplifying and putting the effort in the right places, that really is what we're looking at. Is are we, are the consents that we're asking for, are we kind of getting people at the right sort of level of, I guess, red tape? Are we putting the right amount of red tape around the right activities? Or are we maybe putting too much around some things and not enough around the other things? So that's really what we're looking at. Like, are we getting the right outcomes for what we're asking people to do, or are we? Yeah, it's.
Yeah, through you, Chair, if you don't mind. We are doing that work, and we're doing it in the context of the compliance work we're doing, and saying where are the real risks. If we better understand the compliance work and where the risks are, you then ask the question, don't you, of what should the consent conditions be? How strenuous should they be, or stringent? And then lastly, they need to be consistent, because that's something we've also struggled with. The extent of the time frames is a question I'll put back to the team. Councillor Scott, I don't have an answer for you on that one at the moment.
And I'm not really seeking an answer on that at all. I'm just putting that out as a generic question, I guess, that is in the back of my mind. I've heard it again from Miles Anderson. When you talk to an MP, those are the things that they bring forward. So there's another question here. So if we're a bit more permissive in terms of time, does the cat really ever get out of the box? I mean, you can always catch up, can't you? Is there an opportunity to say, listen, we'll give you a period of time that gives you the things that you want, but there's a condition here that says, if that's not working for us, then we'll get you back in to have another look at that. Is that possible in terms of consenting?
It is. When we've got the systems, if we've got the system set up that we're able to kind of put the effort into kind of going back and doing the checking as well, I think. Okay.
I can probably answer that for you, Councillor Scott. Yes, we do have the ability to review. It's quite difficult to go through those processes, both for the council and for the consent holder. And typically we've used, I guess, consent duration has been a better approach to revisit it. In saying that, noting your points around the consent duration, it is something that's obviously always back of the mind. It's one of those things that gets balanced, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into that. And I'm aware we've had some queries come through around that, and I understand we're preparing a response on that matter. So,
thanks, Peter. Claire?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thanks, Lisa, for bringing this and presenting it to us. I mean, it's quite exciting, and I sit here and I think this is showing that we're really looking at being smarter and better and more efficient in our planning. And I know that Council Tables acknowledged that. What other sort of opportunities are there? Like, for example, I know that we spent something like 10 mil on the water data documentation project previously, which I would have thought was around freshwater accounting process. I mean, we have invested in a lot of stuff to try and get here. So I guess, are we just going to build on that, or are we starting from scratch again? Because, digitising is great. I mean, I know other councils do it, and I do wonder why we haven't done it. But that's also going to be a heck of a big job to digitise everything in our resource consents and planning stuff.
Yeah, massive task, and not starting from scratch. I think what was achieved in that water data project has put us on like a really good grounding to be able to kind of continue that work, and that's sort of what's happening at the moment in the understanding in our freshwater accounting space. So that is definitely work that's being built on. It's really, I think the next step is just kind of pulling all of those bits together so that we can kind of go, here's a plan limit, this is what all of the consents have allocated, this is the bucket that we've got left to play with, and then we can sort of make some choices about best use of what's left.
Thanks, Claire. Grant?
Yeah, thanks for this. Just one thing I'm looking at in the resized part of it. On the other page, you talk about using tools available under the new legislation, spatial planning. There's nothing in these years going forward about the delivery of spatial planning across Canterbury in terms of what we were talking about before, and even what Peter's talking, trying to move away from a regulatory rule-based system as quickly as possible. And in which case there might be, in my mind, different skill sets required within the organisation, and thinking about what would those spatial plans might look like. I'm kind of thinking about the Y connection, their catchment planning process as providing some guidance, I suppose, as to how you would convey that information to the public, but more so to farmers. So it's kind of like it's a different approach requiring some speed, and it's just so it's just where's that going to happen?
Sure. Yeah, so some of that work's already underway as well, and it's in part being driven out of some Merrill Forum work, and colleagues in the planning section as well are sort of involved in it. More Amanda Thompson's team than mine, but yeah, that is definitely work that's going on as well. In terms of plan development, I mean, it's not necessarily just a regional council function. So I guess that's something that, as a region, we actually have to figure out how we're going to approach that, and those are some discussions that need to go on in the meantime. But sort of talking about over sort of the immediate sort of 12 months, I guess that work will go on in the background, but it not, I guess, at a pace that means a big change for sort of what we're spending compared to what was anticipated in the LTP.
Lisa, I think I can jump in and help with this a little bit, Grant. And I sort of see the plan architecture stuff, and maybe even like you said before, about how we rework some of the RPS work that could fit into a spatial plan. So there is thought going on about it, Grant. I know it's not like listed here as a point under these years, but it's probably a little bit because it's not in legislation just yet. But the Merrill Forum has been preempting that a little bit and is supportive of a regional spatial plan process and program. One of the things we talked about at the last Merrill Forum was, and I sort of pushed for this a few times, is that part of the regional deal stuff could include that, that the regional spatial plan could be pushed forward as that, especially saying to government, well, if you want to try it, we've already done one for Greater Christchurch. It could be good to let us have a go at doing it for the region if you wanted someone to do it sort of first. So that's a sort of something that I've put out there. There's sort of support for that at the Mayoral Forum, but we haven't made any decisions other than it is in the sort of work program for the Mayoral Forum to do a regional spatial planning process, but we haven't got the detail yet. But it has been thought about. So I think this, just rest assured, there is people thinking about it, trying to work on it, but we don't know exactly how it's going to work yet. But of course, when the legislation lands, it might be prescribed, but we'll also be sort of preempted and ready to do something. So yeah, rest assured it's there. It's not quite written down, but I think Lisa did explain earlier on that there is thoughts going on about the RPS work, how that could be reshaped and reskinned. So that's positive. You happy with that? Good. Vicky.
Just asking a question on the Section 35 part. Am I right in are we going to be looking at, or will someone be looking at the data that we have, like where we're at with our water quality, flows, all those things, and whether the planning policies and so on that we've currently got are actually helping to deliver on the outcomes? Because I haven't seen anything, but that is the intention. Is that going to be done entirely in-house, or is there going to be an independent component to that as well?
Yeah, so you recall, I think Joe walked you through, there's 3 stages to the Section 35 work that we're doing. The first stage was just to kind of gather up what was all the monitoring that we've done in the last 5 years, and make that available. The second part is to go through at a very high level and just go, these are the outcomes that we are meeting, that we're not meeting, or we're not really sure if we're meeting. And then the third phase is to do some deep dives into the where we're not meeting, or where we don't know, and understand understand why. And I think also in that, understanding how much we can tell is from what's gone on in the plans, or what's just kind of happened sort of around the plans. So yeah, there's done sort of in-house. The third phase, we're working with Jacobs Consultants to kind of have their independence, and they did the first phase as well, which was to sort of gather all the information. They're working alongside us on the second phase. So,
thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Any other questions, councillors? No, I think we've got through it. Thanks so much, Lisa, and looking forward to our next briefings in July and August to get a bit more detail. So thank you. So I know we've finished a little bit early. 2:30 we're meant to have our briefing there about public transport and PX.